okay, I can chill out now with this section because while I was raging about all those great economic institutions and those international organizations based on security and defense and how active they are and they do lots of stuff and they shape lots of stuff and they affect current events, and that's all true, I'm now talking about just a few supranationalist organizations that are based on cultural identity. That's the thing that binds them together. And these are kind of unique. They're actually important because they're mostly very big. They're some of the biggest supranationalist organizations on the planet, but I'm not getting that excited about them because, as opposed to the other ones we've already talked about, they don't do that much. And actually, most of them are bordering on wildly unsuccessful. But I think they're important to talk about nonetheless. So what are some of these supranationalist organizations that aren't primarily focused on economics or focused on security and defense, but just on some sort of cultural similarity or idea about they're going to help each other do something just because they have something in common? Well, I'm just going to cover three of them. I'm sure there are many, many around the world, but the three major ones that you'll hear about in current events, and that are the biggest in size, quite frankly, are the Arab League, the Organization of American States, and, of course, the African Union. Now, we'll start with the Arab League, officially called the League of Arab States. It's kind of like the Justice League for the Middle East. A regional organization based on Arabness. and that's what binds the states together. And they really have gotten together to say, we're all Arab, so let's all get together with our Arabness and promote our Arabness and help our Arabness, help each other work problems out, work together maybe in a variety of other ways based on our common Arabness. Now, Arab is a ethnicity. It's a language too. It's an ethnicity. It's not a religion. Most Arabs are Islamic, but this is not a religious organization. It's based on this ethnicity. So where are Arab people at? Well, you probably got a clue already. This entity was started up way back when, 1945, just after World War II, like the UN and a lot of these other ones we've talked about. And its original members were Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Yemen. Yeah, that kind of classic core right there in the center of the Middle East, right there on the Arabian Peninsula. Hell, that's right. Saudi Arabia is in it, on the Arabian Peninsula. That's the core of Arabness. It has since expanded out to incorporate 22 states altogether across North Africa and the classic Middle East, and actually has 4 other observer states. Now, that's who they are. What is it they do? What are they trying to do? Like I said, Arab is an ethnicity. They have a common historic lineage and a common historic background and a common religion and lots of things in common. And so this group got together to say, let's work together to solve our common problems, all right? We are 22 different sovereign states, but we share so much. So let's get together to fix stuff in our area and perhaps even present a kind of common front to the world on issues which concern us and our peoples. Now, that's it in a nutshell. Let me give you their official definition here. The main goal of the League, in their words, and I quote, is to draw closer the relations between member states and coordinate collaboration between them, to safeguard their independence and sovereignty, and to consider in a general way the affairs and interest of the Arab peoples and countries. End of quote. Now, I'm sorry. I should apologize right up front to my Arab friends because I generally kind of mock this supranationalist organization. Why? Because that all sounds real nice and they have all these commonalities and they should be working together and doing lots of stuff and therefore they're working in peaceful harmony and doing all these great things. Hell no. This group has accomplished little to nothing in the last 65 years since their inception. They mostly fight. They get together once a year, and the presidents and heads of states and kings of these countries get together. I have yet to know any major initiative that they actually pushed through that was successful within the Arab League or in the world, or any common front that this group has ever presented is beyond me. Now, I'm sure they've done stuff. It's just never really amounted to much in the bigger scope of things. So all 22 countries may agree to, hey, we think Israel sucks, or we think the Israeli-Palestinian situation should be solved like this, but it's never been enacted. It's never gone anywhere else. And these guys don't even get along with each other. There's a lot of infighting every damn year at the Arab League meeting. Usually somebody storms out pissed off, if not a bunch of countries. Hell, the Arab League kicked Egypt out of its group several decades back after Egypt recognized Israel and had a peace treaty with Israel. The Arab League got so pissed off, they kicked Egypt out. They've since been let back in. At one point, actually 2 different points, Libya quit. They just said, "Oh, the hell with the Arab League. Arab my ass. We can't agree on nothing, so we're just not even coming to the meetings anymore." And that was actually under Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, General Leader Gaddafi, who said, "You know what? The Arab League is dysfunctional. We should be speaking with a common voice to solve problems. We don't ever get shit done, so I quit being Arab. I quit being Arab. I'm going to turn around and be African now," because Libya is both in the Arab League and the African Union. The hell with being Arab, I'm going to be African. You can see this, by the way, that Muammar Gaddafi switched dressing. He used to dress in military garb and kind of Middle Eastern traditional dress, and then he quit being Arab and picked up African dress. So now he's African. Boy, that guy's hilarious, and we'll come back to him in just a little bit. So I want you to know the Arab League, not because of any great things they've done, but more so for the great potential they could have if they were to ever get their act together and speak with a common voice. Because again, what their kind of charter is, we should work together to help solve conflicts, maybe even promote economic ties and transfers of energy and technology and maybe a single education system. And they have talked about lots of things. Not a lot of it has happened, but boy, shouldn't this group have a lot more voice than it does? What do I mean by that? Well, consider that in the Arab League contains most of the OPEC members. Yeah. The lion's share of the world's exported oil comes out of Arab League states. They actually, as a singular voice, should have a hell of a lot of economic and therefore political clout in the world. They should. And actually, they used to. They effectively called an embargo. It was OPEC was the one who did it, but with the assistance and promotion of the Arab League, had an embargo to the United States and Western Europe way back in the 70s, which sparked this whole oil crisis. That's the first and last time they ever did it, by the way. But they do have tremendous power if they would work together. They could enact a lot of things that would change the way that conflicts have been going down in the Middle East. But as a general rule, I got to step back and kind of chuckle, not because I don't like them, but because they really haven't done anything. The Middle East is still rife with conflict. Nothing has been solved. If anything, there are more conflicts now than there used to be back when this league was started 65 years ago. There's more endemic poverty. There's more wealth disparity. So the idea that this league has accomplished much is it's kind of hard to see. And I want my Arab friends to come tell me how I'm wrong and point it out. But again, I want to end on this. They could have quite a big voice if they truly were to work together as a concise, singular entity. And does the rest of the world want that to happen, by the way? This is perhaps why they haven't worked together well. Does the rest of the world, does the United States want the Arab League to be a strong, singular voice entity? Does the European countries, are they all about that? Sure, yeah, go Arab League. Hell no. The outside world has no vested interest in all of the Middle East speaking as a singular entity because they would probably come up with a lot of solutions to problems that would not make the U.S. and the Europeans happy, would they? They certainly wouldn't make Israel happy, a lot of the things that the Arab League would come up with to solve the Arab-Palestinian conflict or a host of other conflicts occurring across the Middle East. So it could very well be that the outside world has helped foster a situation where the Arab League doesn't work together very well. But I've spoken too much about an entity that's not accomplished a lot. Let's get to one that has. And the next one, supranationalist organization based on a common identity or common culture, is one closer to home here. Here in the Americas, the Organization of American States, or OAS. And this is an international organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., which has the 35 sovereign states of all the Americas as members. I mean, yeah, pretty much every state on this side of the planet is in the OAS. It's quite a successful little entity. Why? Because they're very fine-tuned and focused on what they do. And they're not about economics and not about military, kind of about security, but what they say is, hey, here's our goal and objective. The OAS is here to strengthen democracy, work for peace, defend human rights across all the Americas. That's it. That's all they do. And it's pretty good. All right. Maybe that's what more international organizations need to do, is just pick one thing you do and do it well. The OAS, you may have seen in news reports or heard about it. These are the guys, this group that goes and oversees elections all throughout the Americas. And again, this is just an American thing. North America, South America, all the America in between. Having said that, Cuba may or may not be a member. They were at one time, then they got kicked out because, of course, they're not a democracy. Lots of OAS states have asked for Cuba to be let back in, but of course the United States hates Cuba, so the USA is not going to let Cuba back into the OAS. And so given at whatever period of time you see this video, Cuba could be reincorporated back into the OAS or not. But generally speaking, it's all of the Americas and just the Americas. And these guys oversee elections to ensure, as a check on each other, that democracy is going forward and to help with human rights and make sure everything's cool and peaceful across all the Americas. And it's not just this organization, but they've done a pretty good job, and the Americas are fairly stable. Yes, there's civil wars here and there. It's not perfect, but these are all democratic nations that you do have to step back from it and say democracy pretty much does work everywhere in the Americas, except Cuba. Now, that's what their goal and objective. That's what they do. What's their commonality? I mean, they have a common purpose, but every institution I've talked about has a common purpose. How do we define this OAS in terms of its identity? Well, it's not that they have the same language or same Arabness or same ethnicity or same poverty levels or development levels or anything. They are really all in the same boat, mostly because of geography. Okay, we're all in the Western Hemisphere in the Americas, but more so because there is a common ideology. There is a shared culture of ideas in the Americas. And the ideas are democracy is good. Individual human rights and freedoms are good. That's what binds all of these member states into this international organization, into this country club. Make sense? All right. Now, that is what binds us together. And that is what their primary focus is. Strengthening democracy, making sure it's checks and balances everywhere. You may have even seen former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. He is often involved in OAS activities, overseeing elections in Venezuela or Chile or Canada. And this group has been successful because of its fine-tuned and honed goals and objectives. But I do want to leave this entity by saying they do aspire to do more as well. They have talks on fostering trade between the member states and fostering perhaps some sort of common law or fostering this or opening a dialogue about that. So I don't want to suggest they just say, hey, we oversee elections and that's it. No, they talk about doing a lot more collaboratively, but this is the one thing that they do the most. Overseeing elections, strengthening democracy, hemisphere wide. And I did want to add in this disclaimer here as well, which is, I like to talk about the OAS, not because it makes news a lot, that it affects a lot of things in the world, but you're increasingly seeing a move from the Latin Americans to start their own little OAS organization, which would essentially be exactly like the OAS, except excluding the United States and Canada. Ow! Damn! Where's that hate coming from? Well, it's not really hate. It's more that as the United States is slipping away from its sole world superpower status, increasingly regional powers are rising, like Mercosur or Brazil down there, and the Latin Americans are increasingly wanting to stand up with their own voice, not in the shadow of Uncle Sam, to build their own culture and their own identity as a regional unit. And therefore, there has been the speculative talk that there's going to be a new OAS that simply does not have a different acronym. I don't even know what they're calling it yet. It has been proposed, but it will exclude the United States and Canada and essentially will be a Latin American forum. So it's not out yet, but I do want you to think about that. It's not really poking the United States in the eye. It's more that the Latin Americans want to stand up and build their own institutions down there, which is kind of what I suggested with Mercosur as well. So watch out for a future spin-off of the OAS that's just distinctly Latin in flavor. Now, let's end our supranationalist organizations based on common culture with the biggest and perhaps the least successful, and that is the African Union. And I'm sorry to my African brothers and sisters out there. I certainly don't want to offend everybody from Africa, but I'm probably going to do it. Here we go. The African Union is I believe, the second biggest supranationalist organization on the planet, right after the United Nations. Obviously, the UN has everybody in the world in it, but the AU has 53 members. I mean, that's a lot of countries. Wow, it must be really successful. Everybody wants it. Not, all right? Its 53 members include the entire African continent with the exception of Morocco. Morocco is the only odd man out, and that's because of a territorial dispute. Morocco is in the process of absorbing this other territory next door to it called Western Sahara, and a lot of AU members are not keen on that, so Morocco pretty much was like, fine, we're out then. We don't want to be in you damn AU. But it's the rest of the entire freaking continent. Now, this isn't even that new either. These guys have been trying to form something, some sort of critical mass in Africa since the independence movement of African states back in the 1950s and 1960s. They've been trying and trying and trying so hard to say, let's all work together in our Africanness. We're all next door neighbors to help each other rise up and get stronger and richer and everything else. And it just ain't panned out, friends. Now, this, again, is not new. It's been through many iterations in the last 50 years. They started out in this attempt, mostly failed, to unite the African continent with the Union of African States back in the 1960s, which didn't really work or do much, so they formed up an organization of African Unity a few decades later, and that morphed into the African Economic Community in the 1980s. And it just never did much. And I talked about this back in the economic supranationalist organizations. I referenced the AU and said they have economics as one of their goals, but why doesn't it work? Because they're poor. Poor people don't buy a lot of stuff, and poor countries don't buy a lot of stuff from each other. So the whole idea that you're going to build a free trade area, it doesn't mean much in Africa because they don't trade much with each other anyway. They have outside ties that they do imports and exports with. You pick any African country, and they probably do way more business with European countries or America than they do with their next door neighbors. And that simply does not change by forming up some sort of regional bloc. It hasn't worked in the African Union situation. So even that economic community they tried to start in the 80s just fell down and failed. I shouldn't even say it failed. It didn't go away. It just never did anything. And people just stopped caring about it. However, there was renewed interest in the 1990s to rejuvenate this thing and try to get some critical mass again. And it's funny, because here he comes again. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was one of the motivating forces behind this. At about the time he said, screw the Arab League, I don't want to be Arab anymore, I want to be African, and started putting on the African traditional costumes, which he'd never worn his whole life. He was one of the driving forces. And in the mid to late 1990s, people started getting excited about it, started talking about it more, started drawing up charters and constitutions, and they officially relaunched the thing as the African Union in 2002. Now, I already referenced this as well. They intentionally picked the name African Union, AU for short, to mimic the European Union, the EU, the European way, which they very, very, very much would like to mimic. In reality, they want it to work like it works in Europe, but it hasn't. Now, among the objectives of the AU's leading institutions are to accelerate the political and socio-economic integration of the entire continent. Whew, that's a tall order. To promote and defend African common positions on interest to African states, to the rest of the world, to combat disease, combat corruption, combat and end poverty, to achieve peace and security in Africa, and to promote democratic institutions and good governance and human rights. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm sorry. Again, That's an awesome shopping list of stuff. I want to put every damn one of them in my African shopping bag and check the hell out of the grocery store. Does Africa have any of these things? Pick anything I just listed in the last 2 minutes. Good governance? Combating poverty? Combating disease like AIDS? If anything, it seems like the situation for all these categories has gotten progressively worse across the continent since the 1960s, and it's hard to see how anything's gotten better since the reintroduction of the AU in 2002. And for all the reasons I've mentioned and more, it's probably going to be a tough sell to suggest that it's going to get any better anytime soon. Not only do you have endemic poverty and rampant disease like AIDS, which of course is crippling some of the nations of the continent, but you do kind of have to tie this thing into a bigger vicious circle that's going on here. Yes, there's chronic poverty and wild wealth disparity across the continent, but then you tie into that there actually isn't very good governance. And I don't mean to make fun of all African presidents, but chronic corruption in politics is one of the downfalls of the continent as a whole. So you don't have good governance, which means you don't really have good institutions and good human rights protections, and everything continues in this cycle that people stay poor and you get bad governance, and it just keeps going round. So as much as they would like to emulate the EU, economically, politically, perhaps militarily, and lots of other things, they're still working on, these individual states are still basically spend most of their time trying to keep their head above water. That's all Namibia is trying to do. That's all Zimbabwe is trying to do. That's all Togo's trying to do. They're trying to keep their heads above water. They're not sitting around debating about, hey, how can we all work together as a whole? Europe developed richer states doing that, yes. They got some time. They can sit around and think about it. They got resources in order to make these things happen. African nations simply do not have that luxury and do not have that capital. And that's one of the main reasons why it just hasn't gelled yet. However, they would like to be as much as possible like the EU. There is even talk of a common trade area, a common currency, a common law, etc., etc., etc. But again, you just start put that on the shopping list with all that other awesome stuff, and they just got a long way to go before they can afford to check out, if that makes sense. Now, none of these things have really panned out yet, with one possible very interesting exception. And that's what I do want you to kind of take away from the AU talk here is their military wing has very interesting prospects. Why would the AU military, of all things I've listed, but governance and disease prevention and trade and all these, why the military might actually work? Because it already kind of has started. Like the EU, which is putting together a common military from the militaries of its member states and saying, hey, we really shouldn't be fighting against each other. We're not going to be fighting against each other. We should have a common military to solve common EU problems. And the Africans are saying, hey, we got a lot of problems down here. There's a lot of wars in Africa. There ain't any up in Europe. There's a lot of wars down in Africa. And yes, we should have a common military group to solve the problems of Africa without relying on the United States or Europe or the UN to come in here and solve these problems, because it's been proven that those outside entities can't and increasingly don't want to try. And I don't mean to sound callous to all of the entities that are outside of Africa, but let's just be brutally honest. Most of the world don't really care about Africa, especially in a recession now. Everybody cares about their families and their states and their societies. No one's sitting around thinking, how can we help Africa more? Oh, there's conflict in Africa. Let's go send our troops to Africa. That is increasingly not happening, and it is not going to happen at all in the near future. Because as was shown when the United States went into Somalia. Remember that movie, Black Hawk Down? Have you seen Black Hawk Down? Where the U.S. military went in to stop a conflict in Somalia and then lost troops and people got shot and drugged through the streets, and it was made into a major motion picture. The U.S. public is like, what the hell are we doing in Africa? Pull our troops out of there. No one even understands the conflict. What the hell are we spending our money there for? It's not of critical national interest. It's not of any interest. It's not, what the hell? And Europeans are increasingly of the same mind of, Well, we don't want to get involved down there. Hell, we used to be the colonial masters of that place. Part of the chronic poverty and conflict is our fault, and we don't even want to get involved down there. You saw that exactly. You remember back when I was talking about sovereignty and the whole genocide issue at the UN. Even when there was an obvious genocide occurring in Rwanda, in Africa, it was obvious. Everybody knew it. Everybody's like, oh, well, but it's Africa. We really don't want to get involved there. Exactly. And that's exactly why the African Union military has the most promise. What? Let me put 2 and 2 together for you here. The outside world sees conflicts happening in Africa, sees endemic poverty, sees lots of bad things, but they don't want to get involved. They don't want to send their troops to go down there and fix the stuff. And quite frankly, again, I've suggested they really can't. So the outside world is increasingly supporting the African Union military and saying, hey, that's a great idea. The next genocide that occurs, the next interstate conflict that occurs, the next civil war that occurs in Africa, let African Union troops handle it. It should probably be that way anyway, damn it. Because we ain't sending our people in. You can forget about that shit. And the UN didn't even go into Rwanda in time. So the US ain't going to do it. Europeans ain't going to do it. Chinese never were going to do it. So you see that perhaps now that this is why the outside world, particularly the rich countries, say, hey, that African Union is a great idea and the rest of it's fine, but it don't work. But the military will support. Money has been flowing in. Training has been flowing in. And indeed, they actually have been employed already. That was African Union troops that went into Burundi right after the Rwanda genocide to settle things out. There's been AU forces in Somalia. There's been AU forces sent to Darfur, Sudan. That's right. I remember our talk about sovereignty in Sudan and the UN Permanent Security Council. The UN can't send anybody to Sudan because China will block it. But the Sudanese president at the time, currently, good old Omar, who perhaps was conducting this genocide, part of the peace process he threw down with the UN was he said, well, I'm not letting you people in, but I'll let African Union troops in. Huh? See? Yeah. Now, the other main reason why this is going to be supported by the outside world is, well, one, they don't want to send their troops into Africa, but also Africa's increasingly look like it may become a hotbed for international terrorism. So it's yet another reason why the U.S. and others have said, yeah, let's strengthen up. Let's beef up that African military and African police and African everything involved with security and let them handle it. Because we can't, it's a big continent. We can't do all that. Let the locals handle that stuff so that terrorist groups can't crop up as well. So there is a lot of motivation from the outside world to support the African Union military, not so much anything else African Union. I mean, countries are going to be nice. They're going to say, yeah, well, that looks great, Africa. You should do that. And maybe they'll write a small check here and there. But they really support the African Union military. All right. Does that make sense? So those are just a few of the supranationalist organizations based on a commonality, a common culture, a common ideology, perhaps even just a common geography that do have some play in the world. They're very big entities in terms of number of states involved, but they don't have a lot of clout. They certainly have not solved a lot of problems when we're thinking about the Arab League or the African Union in their own neighborhoods, but they do have potential promise. The Arab League could do a lot more if it ever truly gets unified. So could African Union, and their example should be the OAS, which does quite a nice little job with their fine-tuned goals and objectives, making sure democracy is safe in the Americas.